Welcome to God, Sex, and You, a daily discipleship podcast on healthy sexuality. Here's your host, Purity Pastor, Dustin Daniels.
I had a dad the other day tell me that his kids were ruining his life. He said it with a grin, so I knew that he was only half kidding. I then asked him if he agreed with Psalm 127, verse 3. It reads, "Children are a gift from the Lord. They are a reward from Him." And he said yes, but it just seems like the reward of the children is so overwhelming most of the time. Do you feel like that? Overwhelmed with kids, frantic when you get to work, and then it just seems like you're not able to get anything done because your mind is on the kids and elsewhere. And then you have to leave work early so that you can drive the kids all around the city because of their extracurricular activities. You know, and by the time everybody gets home, it's like close to 9 p.m. at night, and everyone's hungry and grumpy and tired. And this is the first time that you've seen your spouse all day as well. And he or she just happens to have that lovin' feeling, in the twinkle of their eye. So how do you pursue sex with your spouse after having kids? What does sexual intimacy look like during this season of your life? Well, in today's podcast, we're going to continue our conversation with Karis Kimmel Murray and her book, Grace-Based Discipline, How to Be at Your Best When Your Kids Are at Their Worst. And we're going to discuss three things. Number one, how sex with your spouse is the culmination of everything else in your life. So in other words, how does sex reveal what other things are either healthy or unhealthy inside your marriage? Number two, husbands, how sensitive are you to your wife's sexual needs? And lastly, my conversation took a surprising turn as we began to discuss why it's so important to have fathers literally speak into the lives of their daughters. So let's get started with today's lesson. It's titled, Sex After Kids. Let me ask you one last question.
Okay.
And, a lot of people that come and see me are dealing with sexuality that's not so healthy, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got pornography issues and maybe adultery issues or emotional affairs and those kind of things. Mm-hmm. So I've got a wife and a husband sitting in my office, and we're talking this stuff out, and they're talking about their kids. They're raising two-year-old, 3-year-old, 4, and the wife says, "You know what? I don't even want you to touch me right now. Mm-hmm. I don't want you. You've done this, but what about the parents that aren't going through something like that, and intimacy and sex is just not a high priority for people through this season of life?" Can you give us a few thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think your sexual relationship when you're married is the health or lack of health that you have there is a culmination of everything else in your life. I mean, really, it's if you look at your sexual relationship in marriage, it's kind of the it's sort of the display. It's what is projecting out in us and saying other things in your life are unhealthy. And so if you are just struggling to raise your kids, and especially if there's a lot of behavior issues with your children, or you're just going through tough seasons with them, that's going to show up in your sex life. We don't think of it that way, really, but a lot of the time we don't think your sex life is only going to be as healthy as all of your other relationships, but that's the truth. That's where the lack of boundaries within your parenting show up. That's where the lack of grace in your relationship shows up. It's a litmus test for how everything else is doing. So that's why it's important to talk about all of the things that make up the whole person. We give ourselves in whole to our spouse. We become one flesh. And so I experience the either health or lack of health of my husband Mike's whole person, and vice versa. So, and then, when you say you talk to a lot of people who have come to a point where there is a big thing,
Sure,
right? That is now the elephant in the room. It's a pornography addiction, or it's an affair that's happened, or it's a just a lack of desire for intimacy. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. Those type of boundary, crossing of those boundaries don't happen in a vacuum.
And they don't happen overnight.
There's a history, there's a path that they walk toward that. And it's not an excuse, but when there isn't a priority placed on an intimate relationship in your marriage, while you have kids, while you're in these like heavy lifting years where you're just exhausted, if you don't put priority on it, you create a hungry spouse in some ways. And a hungry spouse maybe makes the wrong choices that they might have been more bolstered against if you had placed a priority on your sexual relationship. And so I remember especially when my kids were young, they don't sleep when you want them to sleep. It turns out that when you put a 2-year-old to bed at night, they don't always stay in bed the whole time, or especially when they're newborns, and I just felt like all I did
I think I've seen that on Super Nanny or something
yeah,
like that.
Exactly. Yeah, somewhere you've seen that kids don't always sleep when we want them to sleep. And because they don't sleep, we don't sleep.
Right.
And we're exhausted. And especially default parent, whoever that is, but it's usually mom, just, feels like I have had creatures touching me all day. And I have had creatures needing me all day. The kids have been climbing me like a jungle gym. They always are hungry. I'm always feeding somebody, and it's often not myself when I need to be eating, but I'm nursing the baby. I'm up 5 times at night, 15 times at night between a couple of kids, and you just are spent, and you just feel like don't even look my direction.
Right.
I know how we got into this position in the first place with all of these children. So don't even think about doing that to me again, because I just cannot take one more thing. And so, at least from the wife's perspective, I think some sensitivity from her husband is a really good thing. And then help. I mean, I know my love language now, and it hasn't always been this way, but my love language now is acts of service. I just need help.
Yeah.
I need some of that burden to be taken off my shoulders, so that I have any kind of a margin to think about a sexual relationship with my husband. I need a little bit of my load lightened.
And that's one of the things that flies in the face of most men when they come home, because they've given, it seems, their best to whatever they're doing, and they come home and then they just want to be left alone.
Right.
But the one thing that they need the most is to be able to take the kids so they can quit crawling on you, for an hour or so. And you can just maybe go have some alone time, take a bath. I mean, you know what I mean? That daddy time, I think, is so important when the dad gets home.
Right.
That we just don't, as men, we don't consider that. We don't even think about that.
Well, because you're not there to see the 1,000 things that have built up through the day. You were at work and you had 1,000 things that you dealt with that I don't see.
Right.
So I think it's easy to kind of get into this like, well, I worked hard all day. Like I deserve some time to rest. And she's saying, well, I mean, have you seen, like, the house looks like a bomb went off in it, and I have been cleaning all day, believe it or not. So it's easy to get into this, like, what I deserve, and him saying, well, but I deserve this. And so I think that's where the self-sacrifice can really, I mean, it's a gift. It is a sacrifice that, I think if men can choose to give that, to give just a little bit more, even though they've given so much all day, when they walk through the door to say, hey, we're going out in the backyard and wrestling, or we're going to go jump in the trampoline, or we're going to take a walk, or I'm going to take 3 of the kids to the grocery store with me. Give me your shopping list and I'll come back. Just anything. And honestly, there is nothing sexier than a man doing dishes. Really. I mean, if you want to light your wife up, just give her a break. Yeah. Let her go have some time.
Help
It
her
to pay
out.
and it
Yeah.
will pay off for you. I mean, that shouldn't be the reason that you do it. And women can kind of smell that come in a mile away if they feel like, well, he's just buttering me up, for later. If it's a genuine, like, let me help you. It might not be a perfect, equation every time, but it makes a huge difference. And you are going to get to a point where you're going to send these kids off into the future, and then you're just going to have each other, and you have to have some kind of a relationship at the end of all that.
Well, and isn't it, don't you want your children to see how mom and dad react and hug and kiss and touch one another affectionately and to be the role model there, and for dad to open up the car door for mom and go, look, this is what I want a man to do for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
When they start dating.
Okay, so make sure I say this right, but I teach my daughters how they should expect to be treated. I teach my girls how they should expect for men to treat them. If we don't have sons, but if we had sons, my husband would teach our sons the way they should expect to be treated by a woman. And vice versa, I teach my daughters the way they should treat their husband. And my husband would teach our sons how they should treat their wives. And so that's why, anybody who's sat on a psychologist's desk or knows anybody who's in the therapy field knows we end up marrying, women end up marrying their father. Men end up marrying their mother. You end up marrying a person just like your father or your mother. And it's because you've learned that is your paradigm for what you should expect. And so that's why it is vital. We set an example, and so even if you're, divorced from your child's other parent, I think this still applies. You're teaching your sons. Let's say you have, a woman has sons and she's divorced from their dad. It's really easy because you're divorced and there's so much strife there to forget that you're teaching your sons how they should expect to be treated by a woman, by how you treat their dad.
Yeah.
And no matter what happens behind the scenes, that should be a wake-up call for you. Because if you can't do it just simply for that other person, because they're a human being, if you can't treat them the way that God treats us and show them grace for them or for you, can you do it for your kids? Because they will grow up and they will expect to have somebody who speaks poorly about them or goes behind their back and says awful things about them if that's what you're doing to their other parent.
Absolutely.
And vice versa. So a holy wake-up call that I know, it hits me hard every day that, like, if I gripe about Mike and something he's doing, and my girls are older now and we're kind of in the friend zone, like we chat like girlfriends sometimes, and I have to watch myself that I don't say, I probably shouldn't say any of that stuff to my girlfriends either, but I have to watch myself that I don't say that about my husband in front of my kids, because they're listening and that's their dad, and that, when a dad takes the time out of his day, especially, we're talking about daughters right now. So when a dad takes the time out of his day, when he gets home, or whether, maybe it's in the morning before they go to school, or some time during that day, to look his daughter in the eye and say, you are amazing. You are smart. You're brilliant. You have great ideas. You're beautiful. It's like an inoculation against dating a knucklehead.
Yeah.
It is potent. I wish I could have such a potent effect on my girls in that, because I don't want them dating knuckleheads either. But honestly, it matters less what I say to them. They're watching what I do. They're watching what I say about myself. If I say, "Ugh, man, I'm getting fat. Like, I got to lose some weight," they're going to adopt my body image regardless of what it is. It doesn't matter what I say to them if it doesn't match how I'm living. But for dads, I do think it matters that dads specifically say what they believe about their daughters. Yeah. Because for whatever reason, I think women, we have a tendency to assume worthlessness by default. In the absence of hearing specifically that we are smart, specifically that we are gifted, specifically that we're world changers, that we're beautiful, we are going to assume the worst by default. Maybe that's true for men too. I'm not a man, so I don't know. But I think women, that's part of the fall for us, is that, the pain that we experience in childbirth, as that childbirth can be a metaphor for everything. The pain that we experience becoming our own person, going from a girl to a woman, the pain that we experience in our soul as we go out into the world, that's part of the fall for us. So we need men in our lives that speak prophecies over us.
Yeah, words matter.
Words matter.
Words matter.
Words matter, and lack of words matter. So I think, my husband is a quieter person. He's less out. He's just less outgoing. He uses a whole lot less words than me per day. Thank the Lord. So he, it would be, and we've even had this conversation. He's like, well, I've never said anything disparaging to the girls, about the girls, to their faces. And there was a moment when I said, yeah, but the lack of words from you, they're going to assume the worst unless they hear it. So that would be a big takeaway point for men, if they're not used to being expressive or emotive with their daughters or their sons, because they have a huge role in their son's life as well. But say the things that you think. Take the time to say the blessings that you think about your kids, the ways that, what you love about them. Take the time to put it into words.
Yeah, that's good
for your kids.
Because if we don't, then they assume the worst.
Yeah,
and we don't want them assuming the worst, because they do deserve better. I mean, I say that, Karis, because I don't want your daughters dating someone like me 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I was the knucklehead teenager, and that's why I've got a soft heart, because it's like, I don't want you to go through dating someone like me. It took, I didn't meet Jesus until I was 30. So it took a lot of time for me to understand how precious women are. It's we're such a sexualized culture. We pornify everything. And if there's not a strong male figure growing up there, that could do some damage.
And I think there's a lot of dads who think, I wouldn't want my daughter to date a guy like the way that I was when I was, 16. Even if he's even if he's come to the Lord, he's totally different now. You think, I wouldn't want her dating a knucklehead like me. Back then, name that and claim it, recognize it. But the thing that you can do that's going to matter more than anything else you do is you can vaccinate her against the knuckleheads. First of all, by treating her mom with all the honor that she's worthy of, and showing it and expressing it in an outward way that people can see, not just assuming that people can read your mind. And then do the same with your daughters. And then moms can give a lot of honor to their husbands by, speaking well of them, speaking well to them as often as we can manage, speaking well about them, because that teaches our sons, this is what you're worth. And you're going to attract someone to you that is going to show you this kind of value as well. And then you're also raising up, a great potential mate for my girls someday, by raising your sons to value all human beings and to value women. I need you, hear me say this as a mother of two daughters, mothers of sons, fathers of sons. I need you to be raising up the kind of men that my girls are going to marry someday. So,
well, Karis, thank you so much for your time. The book is called Grace-Based Discipline, and they can visit familymatters.net.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, you can get a paperback on familymatters.net. And if you like to read ebooks, it's available on Kindle as well at amazon.com. And you can connect with me on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and find out a whole lot more about our ministry at familymatters.net.
What a great way to finish up the week, to talk about grace all week long and then in so many different areas of life, especially in and through discipline. To learn more about Karis and her brand new book, it's titled Grace-Based Discipline, How to Be at Your Best When Your Kids Are at Their Worst. You can visit familymatters.net. Well, next week we begin a brand new teaching series. It's called Today's Sexual Revolution. It's a series that I taught to students at Gateway Seminary. Did you know that we were currently living in a revolt on all things related to sex? Well, starting Monday, I'll dive into those specific areas and also, most importantly, how those areas, how they affect you, your family, and your church. Thank you for listening to God, Sex, and You. I'm Dustin Daniels. If you're in Phoenix, I would love to meet you face to face. I want to invite you to our weekly community group. It's a group that focuses in on healthy sexuality, along with lots and lots of prayer. It's for men, women, single, divorced, remarried. Doesn't matter what your marital status is. Everyone is welcome. You're invited to listen to God with us every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at Northern Hills Community Church. We're in Building A, Room 301. You can stay up to date by following me on Twitter. I'm at Purity Pastor. You can also email me your questions at dustindanielsradio.com. Well, we've been doing a lot of talking all week long, haven't we? And that's why this passage from the Apostle Paul is just so important. 1 Corinthians 4:20, it's why I close the show every single time with this. The kingdom of God isn't just a lot of talk. It's living in God's power. And that power, my friend, is the very name and the shed blood of Jesus Christ, our Savior God. I love you. Have a great weekend. I'll see you Monday.